The afternoon sun scorched the pavement outside First Trust Bank, its rays bouncing off the glass doors as customers shuffled in and out. Inside, the air conditioning hummed softly, cooling the pristine marble floors and dark oak counters. A line of impatient customers stretched toward the entrance, but Isaiah Carter wasn't in a hurry. He had waited years for this moment to chance. Isaiah straightened his tie, smoothing the front of his navy blue suit as he stepped forward. He had prepared for this. His business plan was airtight, his credit score solid, and his collateral more than enough. He had done everything by the book. He couldn't afford a single misstep. "Mr. Carter?" A voice called from behind the counter. Isaiah's eyes met the stern gaze of Mr. Whitaker, gray hair and a perpetual scowl. Whitaker gestured toward his office, a glass-enclosed space with an American flag hanging behind the desk. Isaiah walked in and sat across from the banker, heart-pounding. "So," Whitaker began, flipping through the loan application, "you're looking for a $10,000 business loan?" "Yes, sir," Isaiah said confidently. "I have the financials right here. My shop has been profitable for 3 years straight, and with this expansion, I can hire more people and—" Whitaker held up a hand, cutting him off. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. "You've done well for yourself, Isaiah." Isaiah frowned. The way he said his name like a schoolteacher, addressing a misbehaving child, made him uneasy. "Your numbers look decent," Whitaker continued, "but I see a few concerns here. You've got some outstanding expenses, and this expansion, it's a big step." Isaiah's stomach tightened. He had anticipated some pushback, but his calculations were solid. "I understand the risks, sir, but I've outlined a clear plan for growth. If you look at—" Whitaker sighed and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Isaiah, I'm going to be real with you. We don't usually approve loans of this size for folks like you." Isaiah's jaw clenched. "Folks like me. It's not personal. You should consider something smaller, maybe a $500 credit line to help with minor repairs." Isaiah felt heat rise to his face. $500? That won't do anything for my business." Whitaker folded his hands. "I understand your frustration, but you need to—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Stay in your place. This town has a way of doing things, and big loans are for folks who can handle them." Isaiah stiffened. He had heard those words before. Stay in your place. They had been whispered to his grandfather when he tried to vote, muttered to his father when he asked for fair wages. Now, they were being used against him, a man who had done everything right. Just then, the office door swung open. A young white man, barely in his 20s, strolled in. He wore a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis, his blonde hair disheveled like he had just rolled out of bed. "Hey, Mr. Whitaker," the young man said, plopping into a chair. "Got my loan ready." Whitaker grinned. "Of course, Ethan. Just need your signature." He slid a folder across the desk. $10,000, just like we discussed." Isaiah's stomach dropped. The same amount he had requested. Ethan barely glanced at the paperwork before signing. "Thanks, Mr. Whitaker. Knew I could count on you." Isaiah's fists clenched. He had worked for years, built his business from the ground up, yet this kid who didn't even bother dressing properly for a bank meeting got what he had been denied. Ethan stood, stretching. "Man, my dad's gonna be happy. He said I should open up my own dealership instead of working for him." Isaiah couldn't hold back anymore. "Excuse me, Mr. Whitaker," he said, his voice tight, "but I'd like to know why he's getting the exact loan I just applied for." Whitaker's fake smile didn't falter. "Isaiah, it's about trust. Ethan comes from a good family. His father has banked with us for years. He's got security." Isaiah's blood boiled. "I have security. My business is profitable. I've done everything required." Whitaker sighed and stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Isaiah, I'm sorry, but my decision is final." Isaiah rose slowly, his mind racing. Every fiber of his being told him to lash out, to demand justice, but he knew how that would end. Instead, he turned and walked out, his jaw tight with anger. As he passed through the bank lobby. He saw Ethan shaking hands with another banker, laughing like the world had been handed to him on a silver platter. Isaiah stepped outside, his hands trembling. He looked across the street at his shop, a small but proud building that had survived despite everything. They wanted him to stay in his place, but Isaiah Carter wasn't the kind of man who did as he was told. The heat of the Mississippi sun was merciless as Isaiah Carter stormed out of First Trust Bank. His breath came in short, angry bursts, his hands clenched into tight fists. He had seen injustice before he had lived it, but this was a slap in the face. He crossed the street and entered Carter's Auto Repair. His shop, the product of years of sweat, toil, and perseverance. The scent of motor oil and metal filled his lungs, grounding him as he slammed the door behind him. His younger brother, Elijah, a wiry man with grease-stained hands, looked up from under the hood of a Chevrolet. "How'd it go?" Elijah asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Isaiah didn't answer right away. He moved to his desk, picked up the glass of water sitting there, and downed it in one go. "They denied me," he said finally, his voice tight. Elijah cursed under his breath. "You serious? With your credit? With the shop running as good as it is?" Isaiah nodded, rubbing his temples. "They gave the same amount I asked for to Ethan Walker. That kid hasn't worked a day in his life." Elijah's expression darkened. "Walker, as in Walker Motors?" "The same," Isaiah muttered. "And you know what Whitaker told me? Stay in your place." Elijah slammed his fist on the hood of the car. "Man, they really think they can just keep us down forever." Isaiah sat heavily in his chair, shaking his head. "I ain't staying in no damn place, Elijah. I've worked too hard for this. I just need another way." The shop door creaked open, and a familiar face entered. Charlie Williams, a tall, broad-shouldered man with deep brown skin and a calm, calculating gaze. He owned a bar down the road and had a reputation for knowing everything that happened in town. Charlie took one look at Isaiah and smirked. "You went to Whitaker, didn't you?" Isaiah exhaled sharply. "Word travels fast." Charlie chuckled, pulling up a chair. "This town ain't changed, brother. They want to keep men like us from building something real. They think the moment we own too much, we become a threat." Elijah folded his arms. "So, what do we do? Let them win?" Charlie leaned forward, lowering his voice. "No, we find another way. Look, Isaiah, you don't need that bank. There are people who believe in black businesses. I know a man in Jackson, wealthy black, and tired of seeing us denied opportunities. He gives out loans, no bank involved." Isaiah's brow furrowed. "That sounds risky." Charlie shrugged. "It's as risky as trusting a white man in this town to loan you money." Isaiah tapped his fingers on the desk. He had spent his life playing by the rules, believing hard work and integrity would be enough. But today proved otherwise. "I want to meet him," Isaiah said finally. Charlie grinned. "Good. Pack a bag. We leave tonight." The drive to Jackson was long, the road stretching under the dim glow of streetlights. Isaiah stared out the window, his mind racing. Charlie drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "You ever heard of Joseph Langston?" Isaiah shook his head. "Well, you're about to. The man's a legend. Started with nothing, built himself an empire. Hotels, restaurants, a whole chain of businesses all black-owned. He funds people like us, folks with ambition but no access." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Sounds like a man I need to meet." They arrived at a large house on the outskirts of Jackson, where a line of expensive cars sat parked in the driveway. Isaiah and Charlie stepped out, greeted by a well-dressed man at the door who led them inside. Joseph Langston sat in a leather chair, a cigar resting between his fingers. His graying hair and sharp eyes gave him a commanding presence. Charlie introduced Isaiah, and Langston nodded. "I've heard about you, Mr. Carter. You run a good shop." "Trying to, sir," Isaiah said. Langston studied him. "Charlie says you need money. 10,000. "Yes, sir. I was denied a loan. Not because I'm unqualified, but because I'm black." Langston chuckled. "Welcome to America. He took a long puff of his cigar. I don't just give money to anyone. I invest in men who can change things. I plan to change everything. Langston smiled. Then, let's talk business. Isaiah Carter sat in Joseph Langston's study, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The room smelled of cigar smoke and aged bourbon. Langston leaned back in his leather chair, eyes sharp as he studied Isaiah. You understand what you're asking for, don't you? Langston said, tapping his cigar against the ashtray. This isn't just about a loan. This is about shaking a system designed to keep men like us out. Isaiah nodded. I've done everything the right way. I played by their rules, and they still shut the door in my face. That's because the rules were never made for us. He leaned forward. Now tell me, if I give you this money, what happens next? Isaiah sat up straight. I expand Carter's auto repair. I hire more workers, black men who can't get jobs anywhere else. I offer fair prices, better service. Langston nodded approvingly. And when Walker Motors tries to put you out of business, Isaiah's jaw tightened. They won't. Langston chuckled. I like you, Isaiah. You remind me of myself when I was younger, angry, ambitious. But ambition without strategy is a dangerous thing. He stood and walked to his desk, opening a drawer. He pulled out a thick envelope and placed it in front of Isaiah. Just me believing in you. Isaiah stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. What's the catch? Langston's smile faded. The catch is that once you take this, you don't back down. You don't fold the moment they push back. And trust me, they will push back. Isaiah exhaled slowly. He had been waiting his whole life for this opportunity. He reached forward, took the envelope, and shook Langston's hand. I won't back down, Isaiah said firmly. Langston grinned. Good. Now go build something they can't tear down. The drive back to Mississippi was quiet, but Isaiah's mind was roaring with plans. He had the money now. The dream was no longer just an idea, it was real. Elijah was waiting at the shop when they pulled up. His eyes widened when Isaiah tossed the envelope onto the desk. You got it, Elijah whispered in disbelief. Isaiah nodded. We start tomorrow. The next few months were a whirlwind of construction, hiring, and business expansion. Isaiah bought new equipment, repaired the garage, and put up a brand new sign, Carter's Auto and Towing. He hired 5 more workers, young black men eager for an opportunity. The shop was no longer just surviving, it was thriving, and that didn't sit well with certain people in town. One evening, Isaiah was locking up when a familiar voice called out. Well, look at you, Ethan, Walker sneered, leaning against a shiny red Mustang. You got yourself a fancy new shop. Must have found some money somewhere. Isaiah turned slowly. Hard work pays off. Ethan chuckled. Nah, see, hard work means knowing your limits, knowing where you belong. He stepped closer, his grin fading. You're stepping out of line, Carter. Isaiah clenched his fists. I'm running a business, same as you. Ethan smirked. No, see, I was born for this. My father built Walker Motors, and one day, it'll be mine. You're borrowing time? Isaiah held his ground. We'll see about that. Ethan's smile turned cold. You've been warned. He climbed into his Mustang and sped off, leaving Isaiah standing in the dim light of the street lamp. The next morning, Carter's Auto and Towing was vandalized. Tires slashed, windows shattered, red paint splattered across the walls. And on the front door, in bold letters, were 3 words, Stay in your place. Isaiah Carter stood in front of his shop, his chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. The morning sun cast long shadows over the damage. Broken glass crunched beneath his boots as he stepped forward, his fingers curling into fists. His workers gathered behind him, murmuring among themselves, their faces twisted in anger and frustration. Elijah knelt by a slashed tire, running his hand over the deep gashes. They did this to send a message. Isaiah's gaze locked onto the red words smeared across his door. Stay in your place. A warning, a challenge, a threat. Charlie Williams pulled up in his truck, slamming the door as he stepped out. I heard what happened, he said, his jaw tight. Ethan, Isaiah exhaled sharply. Who else? Charlie shook his head. That boy's got the whole town behind him. You think the cops are gonna do anything? Isaiah already knew the answer. The sheriff, a stout man named Roy Tucker, was a drinking buddy of Ethan's father. Reporting this would be like handing over a confession that it was his fault for daring to expand his business. I'm not backing down, Isaiah said, his voice like steel. Elijah rose to his feet. Then we fix this. Right now. The men got to work, sweeping up broken glass, repainting the walls, replacing the damaged tires. The vandalism was meant to break them, to scare them into submission. But Isaiah wasn't scared. If anything, he was angrier than ever. By noon, the shop was back in business, and customers still showed up, undeterred by the morning's destruction. A few whispered words of encouragement. Others simply nodded, an unspoken show of solidarity. But Isaiah knew this wasn't over. That night, Isaiah sat at his kitchen table, running his fingers over the rim of his coffee cup. His wife, Naomi, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You can't fight them all, Isaiah, she whispered. He turned to her, seeing the worrying in her deep brown eyes. I'm not looking for a fight, he said. I just want what's mine. She sighed, sitting beside him. But at what cost? They won't stop until they destroy everything you've built. Isaiah leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Then I'll build it again, and again, and again, until they have no choice but to accept that I'm not going anywhere. Naomi studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then we stand together. He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. Always. The next day, Isaiah walked into First Trust Bank, his presence turning heads. Mr. Whitaker looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face as Isaiah strode toward him. Mr. Carter, Whitaker said, clearing his throat. What brings you here? Isaiah pulled out a thick envelope and slapped it onto the desk. I came to pay off my old loan in full. Whitaker blinked. But you never, he hesitated. You never got a loan from us. Isaiah smirked. That's right, but I got one anyway. Whitaker's face darkened as he slowly opened the envelope, counting the crisp bills inside. And where exactly did you get this money? Isaiah folded his arms. From someone who believes in my business more than you ever did. Whitaker clenched his jaw. Mr. Carter, you must understand our decisions are based on risk. You can't expect the bank to. Spare me the speech, Isaiah interrupted. I don't need your bank. I never did. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. And soon, a whole lot of other black business owners won't need you either. Whitaker stiffened. Are you threatening the bank, Mr. Carter? Isaiah smiled. No, sir. I'm just stating a fact. He turned and walked out, leaving Whitaker fuming behind his desk. Outside, Elijah was waiting by the truck. How'd it feel? Isaiah exhaled, a slow grin spreading across his face. Like freedom. But freedom came at a price, and that price would soon come knocking. That evening, as Isaiah locked up the shop, a black sedan rolled to a stop across the street. 4 men stepped out, their faces shadowed by the streetlights. They weren't wearing uniforms, but Isaiah knew exactly who they were. Men like them had terrorized his father, his grandfather. One of them, a burly man with a cigarette hanging from his lips, stepped forward. Carter, he said, his voice low and menacing. You've been making a lot of noise. Isaiah held his ground. I don't plan on stopping. The man chuckled, taking a long drag from his cigarette. That's what I thought. He flicked the burning stub onto the pavement, crushing it under his boot. You've been warned. The men climbed back into the car and drove off, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the humid air. Isaiah watched them disappear into the night, his heart pounding. He had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. The next few weeks were a tense, unspoken standoff. So did the hostility from certain corners of the town. Walker Motors, once the unquestioned leader in car repairs, began to lose customers. People were talking, word was spreading about Carter's Auto and Towing, and the services were better, prices were fair, and the business was more personal. But Ethan Walker wasn't about to let his family's legacy slip away without a fight. Isaiah had just finished A long day of work when he heard the familiar rumble of an engine outside. It was the unmistakable sound of his truck being torn apart. He rushed out of the garage and turned the corner just in time to see a man in a black hoodie and gloves jamming a crowbar under his truck's hood. "Hey!" Isaiah shouted, his voice raw with fury. The man froze, eyes wide with fear, before he spun on his heels and bolted down the street. Isaiah chased him, adrenaline pumping through his veins, but the man was faster. By the time Isaiah reached the corner, the man had disappeared into the night. He pounded his fist on the sidewalk, grinding his teeth. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. It was personal. Isaiah's heart sank as his brother ended the call. "It's Walker's people," Elijah said grimly. "I know it." Isaiah exhaled sharply. "I can't keep letting them push us around." Elijah gripped the back of his chair. "You need to do something about it. You've been playing nice, but they're not. Let's make it official." Isaiah nodded, his jaw tight, but now he knew if he wanted to win, he had to stop playing by their rules. It was time for a different approach. He stormed back outside, his hands clenched into fists. The car thief may have escaped, but the fight was far from over. The next day, a flyer appeared on every lamppost in town. It wasn't a normal advertisement. It was bold, in red ink, with a phrase that caught everyone's attention. "Fight back, fight for your place. Support black businesses." Isaiah had been careful. He didn't want to provoke the wrong people. But this flyer was a direct message. It wasn't just about car repairs. It was about standing up, about fighting against the years of oppression. The town buzzed with whispers. Some were angry, some were curious. But there was a shift in the air, something Isaiah had been waiting for. Later that afternoon, Isaiah met with Charlie Williams in his bar. The place was dim, and the clink of glasses and low hum of conversation made it feel like a secret meeting. Charlie sat at the back, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes sharp as ever. "You really think this is gonna work?" Charlie asked, studying the flyer. Isaiah leaned forward, tapping his finger on the table. "I know it's gonna work. People are sick of being ignored. They want to fight back, but they don't know how. The tools?" "Yeah," Isaiah said. "We need to get organized. I'll meet with the other business owners. Get them on board. The more of us there are, the harder it is to tear us down." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a coalition?" Isaiah nodded. "Exactly. It's the only way we'll get real power." Charlie took a long swig of his drink, contemplating the idea. "You know it won't be easy. You're messing with people who've been running this town for generations. Walker, Whitaker, and the rest of them. They've got everything tied up. And they'll fight dirty." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "They'll fight dirty. But I've been fighting dirty my whole life." Charlie set his glass down, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, you've got my support. Just don't get too cocky." Isaiah stood, his resolve hardening. "We'll make this town see that we belong here, just as much as they do." As the days passed, the movement grew. Flyers were plastered everywhere on walls, telephone poles, and even in shop windows. Isaiah's words began to resonate with people. Other black-owned businesses, those that had been forced to keep quiet for fear of retaliation, started to come forward. Restaurants, beauty salons, construction companies, each of them pledged to support the cause. The tension in town was palpable. Walker Motors was losing customers by the day, and the town's elite, the ones who had always controlled the money, the power, were feeling it. They didn't like it, not one bit. And then, one evening, as Isaiah sat in his office going over the books, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He picked it up. "You're playing a dangerous game, Carter," the voice on the other end growled. Isaiah's blood ran cold. He recognized the voice immediately. "Walker, what do you want?" A pause, then a laugh, dark and menacing. "I'm going to make sure you regret this." Isaiah's grip tightened on the phone. "Do your worst." The line went dead, but Isaiah knew it wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The morning Isaiah woke up to the news, the world felt different. There was a storm coming, and he could feel it in the air. His phone buzzed non-stop with calls from business owners, workers, and even some customers who were concerned. Something had happened overnight. A new chapter in the battle had begun, and it was bigger than anyone could have imagined. The headline in the newspaper was blunt, and it hit hard. Carter's auto and towing shop set on fire. Arson suspected. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper in disbelief. Naomi placed a cup of coffee in front of him, her eyes brimming with concern. "I knew it was coming," Isaiah muttered, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. "I knew they wouldn't stop until it was burned to the ground." Naomi sat beside him. "But you're still standing, Isaiah. They can't take everything from you." Isaiah looked at the smoldering remains of his shop in the photo. The fire had done its damage, but not enough to destroy his resolve. He could rebuild, and he would rebuild. "I'm not done," he said, his voice low but steady. "This was just their way of trying to silence me, and it won't work." Naomi nodded. "We fight back. Then, we don't just sit back and take it." Later that day, as Isaiah and Elijah surveyed the damage to the shop, a group of men showed up. They weren't just any men. These were the ones who had been quietly supporting Isaiah all along, the ones who had kept their heads down and avoided confrontation. But now, they were ready. Charlie Williams was at the forefront. He walked up to Isaiah, a determined glint in his eye. "We're in this together, Isaiah. You don't rebuild this alone. We stand with you." Isaiah looked around at the faces of the men, business owners, workers, and community leaders who had felt the sting of injustice in their own lives. They were ready. "We rebuild," Isaiah said firmly, "and this time, we build something bigger than they ever imagined." Charlie nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "That's the spirit." The days following the fire were a blur of action. Isaiah worked around the clock, coordinating with insurance companies, gathering supplies, and organizing a team to clear away the charred remnants of his shop. But it wasn't just about rebuilding the garage. It was about building something that couldn't be torn down, a movement, and that movement was spreading. As word spread about the fire, the town began to take notice. People were showing up at Isaiah's temporary location, offering help, tools, labor, money. It was no longer just about one man fighting for his business. It was about a community coming together, united by a common cause. Even those who had once been afraid to stand up began to speak out. They didn't want to be intimidated anymore. They didn't want to be silent while men like Ethan Walker tried to hold them down. One afternoon, as Isaiah was checking the progress on the new garage, he received a call from an unexpected source. It was Sheriff Roy Tucker. "You know," Tucker said, his tone surprisingly calm, "I've been hearing things about you, your business, about this whole fight back thing." Isaiah's heart skipped a beat. "What's it to you, Sheriff?" Tucker paused. "I've seen how things have been going in town. Folks are upset. They want change. And honestly, I'm starting to think you might be onto something." Isaiah frowned, not sure where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" "Walker's been running things for too long, Isaiah," Tucker said quietly. "People are tired of it. They don't say it out loud, but they're tired. Maybe you're the one who can change that." Isaiah was speechless. The sheriff, who had once turned a blind eye to the corruption, was now speaking to him like an ally. "I'm not asking you to break the law," Tucker continued, "but keep doing what you're doing. You've got the town's attention. Just don't forget the bigger picture." Isaiah didn't fully trust him, but he knew one thing for sure. This was a turning point. As the weeks passed, Isaiah and his supporters worked tirelessly, and the new shop slowly began to take shape. It was larger, more modern, with a distinct sign that read, "Carter's Auto and Towing, a business built by us for us." The phrase was more than just a slogan. It was a declaration. Isaiah was no longer just a small business owner trying to survive. He was the face of a new movement, a new way of doing business in a town that had long been ruled by the wealthy, the connected, the untouchable. But the battle wasn't over. One evening, as Isaiah was locking up, a familiar black sedan pulled up outside. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The car door opened, and Ethan Walker stepped out, his expression cold and determined. "You're still here, huh?" Ethan sneered. Isaiah didn't flinch. "I'm still here." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You've been causing too much trouble, Carter. You've made a fool of my family, and I won't let it stand." Isaiah stood tall, his voice unwavering. "It's not about you or your family, Ethan. It's about what's right. And I'm not going anywhere." Ethan took a step closer. "We'll see about that." But before he could say more, Sheriff Tucker's truck pulled up, and the deputy stepped off. "Ethan," Tucker said, his voice low but firm, "this has gone far enough." Ethan's face twisted in rage. "You too, Roy." Tucker didn't flinch. "You've been warned. Any more trouble, and it's on you." Ethan's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing more. He got back into his car and slammed the door. The sedan peeled away, leaving Isaiah and Tucker standing in the street, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air. Tucker turned to Isaiah. "You keep doing what you're doing. People are watching, and they're starting to see you as the future." Isaiah watched the sheriff walk back to his truck, his chest swelling with pride. It wasn't just about the shop anymore. It was about the change that was coming, the voices that were finally being heard. The fight wasn't over. There would be more battles, more struggles, and more sacrifices. But one thing was certain. Isaiah Carter was no longer just fighting for a loan. He was fighting for a future, for a place in the world that no one could take from him, and he would not be silenced. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, in order to strengthen our community, I'd like to know where you're watching from and what time you're currently watching this video.